The general's authority was absolute, a fact as cold and hard as the concrete walls of the command bunker. When he froze, the entire room froze with him, a tableau of silent, uniformed figures caught in the sudden gravity of his stillness. He wasn't looking at the main strategic display, a wall of flickering maps and streaming data. He was looking at the arm of a low-ranking warrant officer, a woman no one had paid much mind to until a moment ago. He saw the edge of a tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve, and for the first time in a decade, General Carrick felt the ghost of fear. He had the same one. This changed everything. Part 1. Arrival and Anonymity. Warrant Officer Eva Rostova arrived at Forward Operating Base Erebus like a whisper of cold air in the already frigid high-altitude desert. The base was a nerve center, a high-tech ear pressed against the chest of their adversaries, nestled in a valley of jagged, unforgiving peaks. Her transfer orders were vague, citing a need for a systems diagnostician with a deep-level background in legacy and next-gen signal architecture to Colonel Madsen, the base commander. That meant she was a glorified IT tech. He greeted her in his office, a cramped space that smelled of stale coffee and ozone. He didn't stand. He gestured to a chair with a pen, his eyes scanning her file on his monitor with a dismissive flick. Rostova, you come from a desk at Command HQ. This isn't HQ. We have real-world, real-time problems here. Don't touch anything without clearing it through my operations chief. Understood, Sir, Rostova said. Her voice was level, betraying no reaction to the condescension. She was assigned a terminal in the darkest corner of the Strategic Operations Center, or SOC. The room was a cathedral of information, dominated by a massive screen displaying satellite feeds, signal intercepts, and drone telemetry. Dozens of operators sat at tiered consoles, their faces illuminated by the glow of data. Rostova's station was an auxiliary diagnostic node, considered little more than an overflow port for maintenance checks. She didn't complain. She methodically set up her workspace, her movements economical and precise. She plugged in a single, unmarked data slate and a custom keyboard, its keys worn smooth from years of use. While the other operators spoke in low, urgent tones, their focus on the immediate tactical picture, Rostova's attention went deeper. Her eyes weren't on the maps, but on the code scrolling at the edge of her screen, the raw data stream that was the lifeblood of the entire base. She saw the subtle latency, the fractional packet loss between the primary satellite uplink and the local servers. The automated system flagged it as atmospheric interference, a negligible anomaly. Rostova knew better. It was a tremor before an earthquake, a flaw in the foundation. She said nothing, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, a silent sentinel in a room full of noise. Part 2. Dismissal and Disdain. Colonel Madsen patrolled his SOC like a shark circling a reef. He was a man who believed in rigid systems, clear hierarchies, and the loud assertion of authority. Subtlety was a foreign language to him. He thrived on the visible and the quantifiable. Troop movements, confirmed intercepts, targets eliminated. The silent, invisible world of code and signals was an abstraction he distrusted, a necessary evil to be managed by specialists he didn't fully understand. He stopped behind Rostova's console, his shadow falling over her screen. She didn't flinch, her focus unbroken. He peered at her display, a cascade of raw hexadecimal code and network logs. It was meaningless noise to him. Warrant Officer, he began, his voice laced with impatient authority. What exactly is this? It looks like you're watching the static. Monitoring the raw data feed from the primary uplink, sir, she answered without turning. I'm tracking packet loss and signal-to-noise ratios at the firmware level. Madsen scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. We have a multi-million-dollar automated diagnostic suite for that. It gives us a nice, clean report in plain English. Green, yellow, or red. Right now it's green. I suggest you let the system do its job. Your job is to be available if something breaks, not to reinvent the wheel. Try not to get in the way of the real operators. The dismissal was as clear as a direct order. The real operators were the analysts tracking enemy movements, the drone pilots, the comm specialist shouting into their headsets. She, in his eyes, was maintenance staff, a janitor for the digital domain. Rostova's expression remained placid. The automated system aggregates data over 30-second intervals, Colonel. It smooths out the anomalies to present a cleaner picture. I'm looking at the data in real time. The anomalies are not random. There's a pattern. A pattern, Madsen repeated, his tone mocking. Right? Well, when your pattern becomes something the actual system decides is a problem, let me know. Until then, keep your corner tidy. He walked away, leaving her in the quiet hum of the servers. Rostova didn't watch him go. She felt the eyes of a few nearby operators on her, a mix of pity and secondhand embarrassment. She ignored them. Inside, there was no anger, no frustration. There was only a cold, methodical calculation. She had assessed the colonel's capabilities and limitations, filed them away, and returned her focus to the problem he couldn't see. The pattern was becoming clearer. It wasn't a system flaw. It was deliberate, intelligent, and it was hiding in the noise. It was a whisper, and she was the only one listening. Part 3. Observation and Foreshadowing. For the next 72 hours, Rostova became part of the background hum of the SOC. She barely spoke, ate nutrient paste at her station, and appeared to do little more than watch incomprehensible lines of code scroll across her screen. But she wasn't just observing the data. She was observing the entire system, human and machine. She watched Sergeant Miller, a young communications tech whose station was 2 consoles down. He was sharp, his fingers flying across his own keyboard with practiced ease. But he was jumpy, overcaffeinated, and prone to fluster under pressure. When a comms link with a forward reconnaissance team experienced a minor glitch, his voice pitched higher, his commands became clipped and frantic until the connection stabilized. He had the skill, Rostova noted, but not the temperament for a full-blown crisis. He relied too heavily on the system's GUI, never delving into the command line interface where the real control lay. She studied the physical infrastructure, the thick bundles of fiber optic cables running through conduits in the ceiling, the server racks behind reinforced glass humming with a constant, low thrum. She noted the power conduits, the backup generator schedules, and the climate control systems that kept the delicate machinery from overheating. She mentally mapped the flow of power and information as if it were a circulatory system. She saw its strengths, redundancy in power, hardened physical security. And she saw its weaknesses, a single point of failure in the primary data processing hub, a piece of hardware that all critical systems routed through. If it went down, the entire base would be deaf and blind. Her primary focus, however, remained on the data stream. The pattern she had detected was no longer a subtle tremor. It was a rhythmic pulse, a digital heartbeat hiding beneath the chaotic noise of trillions of bits of information. It was a sophisticated cloaking technique. The intruder wasn't trying to break down the door. They were already inside, disguised as a normal part of the building's ambient noise, patiently and methodically mapping the network. They were looking for the heart, the central processing hub. She began to quietly build a digital trap. Using her own slate, she wrote a small, elegant script, a piece of code that would act as a honeypot. It mimicked a vulnerable, high-priority data node, but was completely isolated from the main network. Anyone trying to access it would reveal their position and methods. She didn't report her findings or her actions. To Madsen, it would sound like paranoia, the fantasy of a bored technician. To report, it would be to invite ridicule and in order to stand down. For now, all she could do was watch, wait, and prepare. Her calm exterior was a mask for a state of supreme readiness, a coiled stillness that preceded decisive, violent action. She knew the whisper would soon become a scream. Part 4. The pressure builds. The scream arrived on a Tuesday. It began not with an alarm or an explosion, but with a quiet admission of failure. "Sir, I've lost the feed from asset designation Viper," a young lieutenant reported, his voice tight. Colonel Madsen swiveled in his command chair. "What do you mean, lost?" "The signal just stopped, sir. 1 second it was there, encrypted and stable. The next, nothing. We're showing a complete carrier wave collapse." Viper was not just any asset. He was a high-level source deep within the enemy's command structure, providing intelligence that had preempted 3 major attacks in the last month. Losing him was catastrophic. "Get it back," Madsen barked. "Reroute through the secondary satellite. Patch him through the drone relay. Do your jobs." The comms floor erupted into a frenzy of control panic. Sergeant Miller's fingers flew across his console, his brow beaded with sweat. "Trying secondary, sir. No handshake. The encryption key isn't validating. It's like the receiver is offline. Drone relay is negative, sir. Total signal degradation in the target area," another operator called out. The automated diagnostic suite, Madsen's trusted oracle, finally shifted from green to yellow, then to a flashing, angry red. A robotic voice announced, "Warning, widespread network instability detected. Cause, unknown." Madsen slammed his fist on his console. "Unknown? How is it unknown? Find a cause. Is it solar flares? Is it enemy jamming?" The panic began to cascade. As the team focused all their energy on reconnecting with Viper, other systems began to falter. The live feed from a Reaper drone flickered and died. Encrypted tactical communications between friendly units started filling with static. The massive screen at the front of the room, once a clear window onto the battlefield, was now a patchwork of frozen images and error messages. The base was going blind. The carefully constructed technological superiority that defined their operations was crumbling into digital dust. Madsen stalked the floor, shouting orders that only added to the confusion. His commands were based on a standard playbook for equipment failure, but this wasn't a simple failure. This was a sophisticated, targeted attack. He was trying to fix a burst dam with a roll of tape. Through it all, Eva Rostova remained perfectly still at her corner station. She watched the chaos unfold with a detached, analytical calm. Her screen was a sea of red warnings, but her focus was on a single, flashing cursor in a command line window. The intruder, using the panic as cover, had finally taken a bait. They had touched her honeypot. She now had their digital signature. She could see them moving through the system, a predator disabling the prey's nervous system before going for the kill. The others were fighting the symptoms. Rostova was looking at the disease itself. The time for observation was over. Part 5. Intervention and Undeniable Skill. Rostova stood. The simple act cut through the rising tide of panic in the SOC. Every eye was on her as she walked with a steady, unhurried pace towards Sergeant Miller's console. The young sergeant was frantically trying to reboot a communications server, his face pale with stress. "Move," she said. It wasn't a request. Miller, startled, looked up at her, then at the chaos, then back at her calm, unyielding face. He vacated the chair without a word. Rostova sat, ignoring the graphical user interface Miller had been wrestling with. She brought up a raw command line terminal. Her fingers didn't just type, they danced across the keyboard in a blur of motion, a symphony of staccato clicks. The screen filled with lines of code, commands being executed faster than anyone could read them. Colonel Madsen stormed over. "Warrant officer, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I gave you a direct order to stay out of the way." Rostova didn't look at him. "You're fighting a ghost, Colonel. This isn't a hardware failure. It's a network intrusion. A polymorphic virus is propagating through your primary routing protocols. They use the Viper link as a Trojan horse. While you've been trying to reconnect, it's been disabling your systems one by one. Rebooting the servers just helps it spread." Her fingers never stopped moving. She wasn't just defending. She was counterattacking. She bypassed the standard security protocols, which the virus had already compromised, and began manually quarantining infected segments of the network. She built digital firewalls on the fly, coded virtual dead, to trap the malicious script. It was the equivalent of performing open-heart surgery on a patient whose heart was still beating at a dead sprint. "They're heading for the central processing hub," she stated, her voice a flat monotone. "If they gain control of it, they can either wipe your systems or, worse, feed you false intelligence. They can turn your own drones against you." She typed a final, complex command string, and hit enter. On the main screen, a schematic of the base's network appeared. A pulsing red infection was spreading through it. Then, a series of thick blue lines appeared, cutting off the red tide just short of the central hub. The virus, trapped, began to attack the new walls, but they held. The room was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the clicking of her keyboard. She then opened a new window. I have their signature. Now I'm tracing their origin point. A world map appeared on her screen, and a thin, glowing line began to stretch backward from their base, hopping between servers in a dozen different countries. Impossible, someone whispered. Backtracing an attack like that should take days. The line stopped, pinpointing a location in a hostile, urban center thousands of miles away. Not impossible, Rostova said, finally looking up from the screen. Just difficult. The SOC was stable. The alarms had ceased. The drone feeds were slowly coming back online. She had single-handedly repelled a catastrophic cyber attack in less than 5 minutes. No one spoke. They just stared, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Part 6. A shift in perception. The silence that followed was heavier than the preceding chaos. It was a silence of recalibration, of minds struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed with their established reality. The quiet, overlooked technician from the corner had just demonstrated a level of skill that bordered on supernatural. Sergeant Miller was the first to break the stillness. He looked from his now-stable console to Rostova, his mouth slightly agape. "Whoa," he breathed, the single word carrying the weight of his utter astonishment. "The command strings you used. Some of those aren't even in the technical manuals. They're hard-coded into the firmware. I didn't think anyone had that level of access." Rostova simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and rose from his chair. Colonel Madsen stared at her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. His authority had been rendered irrelevant, his methods proven useless. He, the commander, had been a bystander while this unknown warrant officer saved his entire operation from ruin. The instinct to reassert his dominance warred with the undeniable truth of her competence. "Report," he finally managed to say, his voice strained. "I want a full written report on my desk in 1 hour. Every action you took, every line of code." "The trace is still active," Rostova replied, her tone professional, not insubordinate. "The attacker is attempting to scrub their trail. I need to maintain pressure to secure their location for a possible counterstrike. A written report would be an inefficient use of my time right now, Colonel." It was a direct contradiction, yet it was delivered as a simple statement of tactical fact. Madsen was momentarily speechless. He was a man of procedure and protocol, and she had just sidestepped both with cold, irrefutable logic. He looked around the SOC. His operators were all looking at him, waiting to see how he would respond. For the first time, he felt his authority was not a given, but a position he had to justify. "Fine," he gritted out. "Maintain the trace. Miller, you're now assigned to her. Give her whatever she needs. Everyone else, back to your stations. Run full diagnostics. I want to know exactly what the damage is." The operators returned to their work, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The low murmur of conversation was different. Glances were constantly cast toward the corner where Rostova had returned to her console. She was no longer invisible. She was an enigma. The quiet woman who had been dismissed as a glorified mechanic had become the most important person in the room. The question on everyone's mind was no longer what she was doing there, but who she was. The dismissal had evaporated, replaced by a thick, palpable curiosity and a new, unspoken form of respect. Part 7. The second test. 3 days later, the second test came. It was not a surprise attack from an external enemy, but a direct order from the top. The digital signature Rostova had captured belonged to a notorious cyber warfare unit known as Cerberus. They were ghosts, known for their ability to strike without a trace and vanish. Capturing their signature was a coup, but Command wanted more. They wanted to turn the tables. General Carrick's name appeared on the encrypted VTC screen in Madsen's office. The general was a living legend, a commander from the old school who had seamlessly adapted to the new age of warfare. His face was granite, carved by decades of command decisions. Colonel, Carrick's voice was gravelly, brooking no argument. I've read your preliminary report on the attack, and the addendum about your new diagnostician. Command is authorizing a responsive action. We're not just going to patch our holes. We're going to burn their entire network to the ground. Your warrant officer isolated them. Now I want her to eliminate them. It was an order of staggering scope. He wasn't asking for a simple counterhack. He was ordering the complete and total destruction of an enemy's digital infrastructure. It was risky, aggressive, and had a dozen ways it could go catastrophically wrong, potentially triggering an international incident. Madsen found himself in an unfamiliar position. He walked out his office and onto the SOC floor, heading directly for Rostova Station. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Rostova, he said, his tone now devoid of any condescension. It was the voice of a commander addressing a specialist. We have new orders. From General Carrick himself. You've been given a green light. The objective is to neutralize the source of the attack. Completely. The assets of the entire regional command are at your disposal. You have the con. He had just handed command of the most critical offensive cyber operation in the theater to a warrant officer he had dismissed days earlier. Rostova looked up, her expression as calm as ever. She simply nodded. I'll need Sergeant Miller, and I need priority access to the Black Ridge satellite array. Full spectrum, no interruptions. Done, Madsen said without hesitation. For the next several hours, Rostova orchestrated a silent war. With Miller at her side, calling out data streams and monitoring system stability, she became a phantom in the global network. She didn't use a battering ram. She used the enemy's own tools against them. She found the backdoors they had built into their own systems, the kill switches they had designed to protect themselves. She moved with a frightening, surgical precision. She didn't just wipe their data. She corrupted their backups, bricked their servers, and turned their own surveillance systems into broadcast beacons, revealing their physical location to a waiting drone. The counterattack was not a chaotic frenzy, but a methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless dismantling. It was elegant. It was terrifying. As the final command was sent, a kill switch that would cascade through the last of their hidden servers, Miller stared at the screen, his face pale. It's done, he whispered. They're gone. It's like they never existed. Rostova leaned back in her chair, the first sign of anything other than pure focus she had shown. She looked at the blank screens that represented a now-defunct enemy. She had not just met the challenge. She had set a new standard for what was possible. Part 8. The Reveal. The VTOL descended through the thin mountain air with a percussive roar, its engines washing the landing pad in a vortex of dust and grit. General Carrick stepped out before the ramp was fully down, his posture rigid, his face grim. He didn't wait for a formal welcome from Colonel Madsen, instead striding directly towards the entrance of the command bunker. He had come to see the architect of his victory in person. He entered the SOC just as Miller was confirming the last of the enemy network had gone dark. The tension in the room was electric. The operators, aware of who had just arrived, sat straighter, their focus absolute. Report, Carrick commanded, his voice cutting through the low hum of the servers. Madsen, now standing beside Rostova's station, gestured toward her. General, Warrant Officer Rostova was the operational lead. All objectives are confirmed complete. The threat is neutralized. Carrick's gaze fell upon Rostova. His eyes, the color of chipped slate, were sharp and analytical, accustomed to stripping away pretense and seeing the soldier beneath the uniform. She stood to face him, her posture correct, her gaze meeting his without deference or challenge. It was a look of professional acknowledgement. As she turned, the cuff of her utility uniform shifted, riding up her forearm by a mere inch. It was a small movement, insignificant to anyone else in the room, but it was enough. On the pale skin of her inner wrist, a small, subtle tattoo was revealed. It was a serpent, inked in black, coiled into a circle and consuming its own tail, the ancient Ouroboros. But within the circle, where there should have been empty space, was a single, five-pointed star. General Carrick froze. His forward momentum ceased so abruptly that his aide nearly collided with him. The air in his lungs seemed to solidify. His mind, a fortress of tactical calculations and strategic imperatives, was suddenly breached by a flood of visceral memory. The smell of ozone and cordite in a bombed-out data haven. The taste of dust and blood. The desperate weight of a mission gone sideways, where the only thing between survival and oblivion was the disembodied voice of their handler, their unseen guardian angel on the network. A voice that belonged to a legendary operator known only by their call sign. His eyes, wide with a dawning, shocking realization, locked onto the tattoo. Unconsciously, his own right hand went to his left wrist, his thumb and forefinger pushing back the sleeve of his own uniform, just above his government-issue watch. There, faded with age but still unmistakable, was the exact same mark. The serpent, the circle, the star. The symbol of a unit that did not officially exist. A unit of ghosts and shadows, whose members were drawn from the most elite corners of every branch, their service records scrubbed clean. They were deniable assets, the scalpels used for operations that could never see the light of day. To bear the mark was to have survived an initiation of fire and sacrifice that few could comprehend. He looked from his own wrist back to her face, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the discipline that was more than training, the calmness that was more than temperament. It was the absolute certainty of a master of their craft, one who had been tested in crucibles he could only imagine. Part 9. A Salute of Equals. The SOC had fallen into a profound silence. Every operator, every officer, including Colonel Madsen, watched the silent, charged exchange between the theater commander and the quiet warrant officer. They didn't understand the meaning of the tattoo, but they understood the general's reaction. They saw a man who was famously unflappable, a leader who had faced down enemy fire and political firestorms without a flicker of emotion, now utterly transfixed, his carefully constructed composure shattered. Carrick slowly lowered his hand, his sleeve falling back into place to cover his own mark. His gaze remained locked on Rostovas. The entire narrative of the past week reformed in his mind. The desk jockey from HQ. The diagnostician. It was a cover, of course. A deep cover assignment to place one of their best inside a critical node, perhaps as a failsafe, an auditor, or something else entirely. He had not been informed. He wasn't meant to be. That was the way their world worked. He straightened his back, his posture shifting. The subtle but distinct change was not lost on the military professionals in the room. He was no longer a general inspecting a subordinate. He was a soldier acknowledging a peer, an equal. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his brow. It was not the crisp, perfunctory salute he would give a junior officer. This was a gesture of profound, earned respect. It was slow, heavy with unspoken history, a salute that acknowledged a shared burden and a shared, secret identity. It was a salute reserved for a fellow warrior of the highest caliber. The room held its collective breath. Rostova's response was immediate and flawless. Her own hand came up in a salute that was a perfect mirror of his, precise, firm, and imbued with the same silent understanding. Then, the general spoke, his voice a low rumble, meant for her ears only, but in the dead quiet of the SOC, everyone heard it. Ouroboros, he said, the name a near-forgotten piece of liturgy. It was the name of the unit itself. Rostova's reply was just as quiet, her lips barely moving. Ghost, she answered. It was her call sign. The legendary network phantom who could get you in anywhere, get you out of anything. The one they all thought was a myth, a story told to recruits to inspire them. General Carrick held the salute for a beat longer, then dropped his hand. He gave a single, sharp nod. No more words were needed. The entire power dynamic of the base had been irrevocably and publicly rewritten. He turned to a stunned Colonel Madsen. "Colonel," Carrick said, his voice back to its commanding tone, though now edged with a new respect. "Give Warrant Officer Rostova anything she requires. Her authority on all matters of network security is to be considered absolute. Is that clear? Yes, General, Madsen replied, his voice hoarse. Perfectly. Part 10, Dignity and Data Streams. General Carrick left as quickly as he had arrived, the thunder of his VTOL fading into the mountain winds. He left behind a command center that was operationally secure but ideologically shattered. The rigid hierarchy had been cracked, replaced by a new, unwritten law. Rostova's word was final. Colonel Madsen approached her console. He looked older than he had an hour ago, the bluster and certainty stripped away, leaving a man humbled by a reality he had been too arrogant to see. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to ask the 1,000 questions burning in his mind. But the words wouldn't come. What could he possibly say? He settled for a simple, honest gesture. He looked her in the eye and gave a short, respectful nod. It was an apology, an acknowledgement, and a promise of deference all in one. Rostova met his gaze and returned the nod, just as succinctly. She required no apology. His understanding was enough. Emotions like vindication were inefficient, a waste of processing power. She had a job to do, and now she could do it without obstruction. That was all that mattered. Madsen walked away, leaving her in the quiet solitude she preferred. Sergeant Miller, who had witnessed the entire exchange, simply pushed a fresh, hot cup of coffee onto the corner of her desk and retreated, sensing she needed no company. Eva Rostova sat back down at her station. Her sleeve once again covered the tattoo, hiding the secret history written on her skin. She turned her attention back to the monitor. The screens, once filled with the red alerts of chaos and intrusion, now showed steady, green data streams. Stable, secure, order restored from chaos. The final image of the day in the SOC was not of the grand strategic map or of the colonel in his command chair. It was the reflection of a quiet warrant officer in a dark monitor. Her face was calm, her focus absolute. Beside her reflection, the endless rivers of data flowed, silent and protected. The respect she now commanded was an unspoken fact, as solid and as present as the hum of the servers and the cold, concrete walls of the bunker. It had not been given, it had been earned, and it needed no further announcement.